We got some big time commitments on the horizon this week. We're going to discuss that and so much more on tonight's episode of Locked On Sooners Live. Thank you for joining us.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners. Thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. And first up, we're going to talk about commitments that are coming up this week. Zion Ragins scheduled to commit tomorrow on Tuesday. Taylor Tatum, the number one running back in the 2024 recruiting class, scheduled to commit on Friday. So it's a big week for the Oklahoma Sooners, who are trying to continue to keep that momentum going on the recruiting trail. And both prospects, it looks like Oklahoma is trending in a very, very positive direction for. You never know what's going to happen until a commitment occurs, but still, with Zion Ragins, all of the predictions for the Georgia product seem to be favoring Oklahoma right now. So you got to feel really, really good about getting the speedster out of the Southeast. The dude just flies. And anytime that you can add speed to your arsenal, to your offense, it's a big deal. And you want to see Oklahoma land this one. Even though they've got a guy like KJ Daniels already committed in the recruiting class, you can never have enough speed. Nick Saban, Alabama, they never turned away speed. They were happy to have it on their roster, always looking to add, as much speed as possible because it kills. We know it. That's the old adage, right? Speed kills. You can't teach it. All you can do is just try and get as much of it on your team as you possibly can. And getting a guy like Zion Ragins, it just opens up the offense for everybody involved. If you're able to get this commitment and land him in the 2024 early signing period or National Signing Day, I mean, it all comes down to that for the Sooners, but they've done a really good job at closing in their first couple recruiting classes over the last year and 8-9 months now that they've been on the job with Brent Venables and his staff. You look back again over the last couple cycles and really only 3 flips, so to speak. You got Ashton Kozart, the wide receiver that flipped to Oregon. That was kind of the early one that happened after he took a visit to Oregon. Then you had the Colton Vasek, the Texas legacy that flipped down to Texas. And then you had Anthony Evans that flipped to Georgia. His mom's a big Georgia fan. So, sometimes mom has a big influence in where you end up. And so it's understandable, but you get a commitment. Brent Venables gets a commitment, and generally, I haven't looked at the percentages of this, but it looks good for Brent Venables and the Oklahoma Sooners coaching staff if they're able to land this commitment. Taylor Tatum, another one that's going to be a huge one for the Sooners to land. Yeah, you've already got Xavier Robinson in the class. Yeah, you've got a loaded running back group as it stands right now with Javante Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk, Dalen Smothers, Caleb Hicks as well. That's a really, really solid group of running backs to be taking into the SEC. But anytime you can land what most people consider is the number one running back in the class, and Taylor Tatum, that's huge. You just take as many good runners as possible. We've talked about this on the show before. You don't want to overwork guys. You don't want to overuse them. Oklahoma's done a really, really nice job over the years, whether it was the Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine times, or Kennedy Brooks and Ramondre Stevenson, of having a nice complementary style of running back rotation where you utilize multiple guys in the rotation to keep guys fresh, especially in an offense like Jeff Lebby's that wants to run 79, 80, 85 plays a game. You want to be able to have a stable of runners that you can keep fresh and keep on the field with fresh legs that are able to churn out some of those tough yards. And it's a dynamic and diverse group of running backs that Oklahoma is trying to recruit right now. And you love to see that. You love to see diverse skill sets that Oklahoma is going to be able to utilize in their offense. If it comes down to, they do end up with 3 running backs in the recruiting class with Robinson, Tatum, and Caden Durham, another player that they're favored to land. You're getting power. You're getting a guy in Xavier Robinson, a dude that's just going to bowl people over and make plays after contact. You get Taylor Tatum, who's kind of that balanced running back. He's able to win with power, able to win with his agility and his speed. And then you get Caden Durham, who's just legit track star. I mean, ran a 10.25 in the 100-yard dash at the Texas 6A area track meet. So just a dude that, again, flies. You can't have enough speed. But again, two commitments, two recruitments that Oklahoma is looking really, really good in as things stand right now. And there's even more, coming on the horizon. I mean, we still got David Stone that we're waiting to hear from, Williams Dwaneri that we're waiting to hear from. By all intents and purposes, by the time the 2023 high school season starts, it sounds like you're going to get those commitments. At least they're going to make their commitments known. Things are trending in a favorable direction for the Sooners on Dwaneri and Stone. You never know what's going to happen on the recruiting front, but things look good right now. And by August 1, according to Williams Dwaneri's head coach at Lee Summit North, that's when he's planning on making his commitment. So that's going to be a big time battle to watch between Oklahoma, Missouri, and Georgia over the next 2 weeks to see where that one finally lands. But just this week alone, you're looking at potentially a composite 5-star running back in Taylor Tatum, a 4-star wide receiver in Zion Ragins that you can add to what On3 considers a top 20 recruiting class right now. Over at 247 Sports, they're a top 30 recruiting class, but everything is trending in a very positive trajectory for Oklahoma to end up again in well within the top 10 and probably within the top 5 when it's all said and done because of what they've got still coming on the 5-star recruiting class in Dwaneri and Stone. They're still in a dogfight with LSU, so to speak, for Dominic McKinley. It's going to be tough to pull him out of out of Louisiana, but you don't count Todd Bates out of a recruitment. He's a good relationship builder, someone who's going to be able to do a good job finishing and closing on a recruitment. But it's kind of a 50-50, a toss-up. If Oklahoma is able to pull that one, it's more power to him. It's one that you probably don't feel as good about. Terry Bussey, looks like the Steve Wiltfong crystal ball from 247 Sports is going to Texas A&M on that. Hey, it was nice to dream, right? It was nice to dream while it lasted. And you never know. Oklahoma could pull a last minute signing like they did with Peyton Bowen in the 2023 cycle. So like I've said before on the show, we're never going to count this coaching staff out of any recruitment. If there's a guy that they want, keep them in the ball game. Imagine that they're going to be in the ball game right up until that signature hits the paper and those papers are faxed in. And, there are going to be some guys that they miss on. That's just the way it goes. You're not going to get everybody you want, but you like where they're at. You like what they've done on the recruiting trail thus far in the 2024 cycle. And it's just getting started. I mean, right now they've got a really nice blue chip ratio with more than 50% of their commitments, blue chip players. And again, the 3 5-stars that are still to come that are going to really raise that recruiting ranking as well. Well, coming up, we got our man Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports going to join the show with us. He's going to talk Big 12 Media Day takeaways, going to give us his outlook on the Big 12 in the 2023 season. We'll even ask him, maybe what are some of his favorite games that he's looking forward to this year outside of OU and Texas, the games that are going to probably tell the tale of who's going to be the Big 12 contenders this season. We're going to do that after we talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is an official sports book partner of Locked On and Major League Baseball. If you are trying to get in the game, go over to FanDuel.com and bet, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel, and you get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. Win or lose, you're getting $200 from FanDuel. That's right. You can spend it on the money line to the over-unders, who you think is going to hit a home run, anything you want to bet on. They got it covered over at FanDuel, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, officials partner of Major League Baseball. And now we're going to bring in our man, Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports, to help us break down what's going on in the Big 12 this year. Shehan, what's up, man?
Hey, nothing much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hey, first of all, I want to congratulate you on 2 things. First, becoming the drip king of Big 12 college football media. And then secondly, congrats on the baby that's going to be coming down the pipe.
Yeah, two very equal accomplishments, I'd say. No, we're very, very excited. We just announced actually today on Monday kind of publicly, and, we're just over the moon right now. Obviously, the parents, it's one of those things where you think you've seen them happy, and then you announce that you're going to have a baby, and they are just off the wall. So we're just so thrilled.
Yeah. It's one of those things that, especially when it's the first, I saw you mention it's the first grandchild for both sets of parents, right?
Yes, it is. First grandchild for both. And actually on my side, the first great grandchild as well for both of my grandmothers. So it's going to be a lot of firsts. We're going to try to, me and my wife are both first siblings. And so we're going to try to tamp down the pressure just a little bit to try to make things a little easier for our future little child. But obviously we're just so excited.
Yeah. And I know you travel internationally quite a bit. Little tip here, do it between 0 to 2 years while they're free. And make sure you get that bassinet seat for that international flight, man. It's a game changer, I promise you.
I'm definitely taking notes, man.
There you go. All right. So Shehan, you were at Big 12 Media Days this past week, and it was quite an event. I mean, anything less than what it was, I think would have been a disappointment. Brett Yormark, very much the showman. The way he delivered his address looked nothing like what you'd expect from a Big 12 media presentation. And so just give us your initial takeaways just on the event itself, what it looks like under Brett Yormark versus what it used to under Bob Bowlesby.
Well, I told him as much. This is the first time I've been to a couple of different media days. I've gotten to go to Pac-12. I've gotten to go to SEC in the past. This is definitely the first time I've seen a commissioner not be behind a podium. And he was up kind of doing his almost Silicon Valley type presentation, bring up a PowerPoint. It was broken off into 3 sections. There was a sit-down Q&A. It was much more engaging, I guess is what you'd say, than what you're kind of used to. Usually it's sort of a guy up at a podium droning on in some ways, and they wanted to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So it was very unique. It definitely felt business-like, I guess you could say in some ways. And I guess I will say the last time that I did go to Pac-12 Media Days was last year. And so, not the most questions necessarily open to the media with all the stuff that George Kliavkoff was dealing with the departure of USC and UCLA. But, I think that it set the tone for the day, right? This was a business event, but it was an entertainment event. It was something where, a lot of different schools brought different ways to kind of show themselves off. Like UCF, I know for content, they brought like a microphone for their players to sing in to kind of do little bits throughout the day. And it was a huge entertainment event. It felt like I don't want to overstate it. I mean, it felt a little like a festival in some ways, just because of how they kind of framed this thing. Lots of people walking around, lots of coaches walking around, great opportunities to kind of casually interact with people. And I think the other part that you have to say too is, just such an unbelievable setting as well at AT&T Stadium. It's been there for a couple of years at this point, but they really sell the idea that the season starts here at AT&T Stadium and the season finishes here at AT&T Stadium. And no, it was a very engaging event.
And so kind of what was your initial kind of takeaway and the vibe with bringing in the 4 new teams into the Big 12? I know you're a Baylor alum, but you've also covered the Big 12 for a long time as well. It's a whole new day. It's a new era in Big 12 football, welcoming Houston, UCF, BYU, and Cincinnati. It's a great vibe.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the biggest thing that I take away from it is these 4 schools are committed and excited to be part of the Big 12 heading forward. They understand what the Big 12 is. I think they have a good understanding also of what the Big 12 isn't and the opportunities that both of those things provide them. UCF, I think, just really stood apart as one that made everything into content. They were constantly chatting people up. They were constantly doing things. But really, all 4 programs, I think, were putting their own little spins on the Big 12 and trying to communicate in some ways their brand identity, I guess you could say. And one thing that I'll mention too, and I know this is an Oklahoma podcast, but when you look at the 12 continuing members of the Big 12, it is just so stark how on the same page they are and how excited they are to kind of be moving forward together. I'll tell you what, obviously, look, if an SEC or Big Ten invitation comes up, that's going to change things, right? So that's always going to be a complicating factor. But I think that the Big 12 just feels like they have great leadership, they have great alignment, everybody seems to be pretty much on the same page. And I'll tell people that I'll tease them, check out CBSSports.com in the next couple of weeks. I'll have a story kind of up on what the first year under Brett Yormark looks like, and what has he done that's worked, and what has he done that hasn't.
Yeah, it's one of those commissioner that I kind of wish they would have made that move 2 years ago. Because I've told people on this show countless times that I'm just a Big 12 fan, dating back to even before I was an Oklahoma fan, just watching on Saturdays as a high school kid. I didn't grow up with a college football affiliation aside from Virginia Tech, because where my granddad went. And so I just watched Big 12 football. And so I would have loved expansion years ago and loved to move to something that's more entertainment business, like a broader view of what college football can be. And I think Brett Yormark's a great commissioner at a great time for the Big 12 as they're transitioning into what's a new era. I know, Jimmy, you don't care about Big 12 football anymore, but I still enjoy it. I think it's still going to be a really fun product out there. And so I'm going to still be watching it, whether Oklahoma is in the Big 12 or in the SEC. I'm still going to be enjoying it because it's local for me still, because Oklahoma State's just down the road and my parents are in Fort Worth with TCU. And so it's still going to be engaging at least. So speaking of Oklahoma and Texas, what was the kind of the vibe you got from everybody about them? I mean, there was, Brett Yormark wanting to celebrate what they meant to the conference. At the same time, was very eager to also promote the idea that, hey, we're bigger than Oklahoma and Texas.
No, well, let's put Mike Gundy to the side for 1 second. Obviously, he has some thoughts that are maybe a little different from the rest of the conference, but I do really feel like, especially for the continuing schools, there was less Texas and Oklahoma talk than I expected. There was less bitterness. There was less anger. Obviously, we've had essentially 2 years at this point for everybody to kind of be what they're going to be, but I didn't feel like they were just putting on a face about being okay with moving on, essentially, right? I think that everybody understood, look, Texas and Oklahoma got an opportunity that they couldn't pass up, and now that things are settled for them and they're pretty confident about what they're going to be in the future, everybody was kind of just ready to move on. Everybody was ready to look forward to what their programs hold, what their conferences hold. Certainly, you couldn't talk about Big 12 Media Days without talking about the attention on Texas as a football program this upcoming season, picked first in the Big 12 for the first time since 2009. But there were little things that would kind of trickle out, right? There was the Mike Gundy comments about Bedlam, which, as somebody who's not a stakeholder in this, come on, Mike, there was obviously the comments from Tim Weiser, the Big 12 deputy athletic director, who used to be the athletic director at Kansas State, where he essentially said, well, Texas is just excited to have somebody new to go beat them. These things happened, right? These things were obviously part of it, but I don't necessarily think that this was an event that was filled with bitterness and anger. I think that everybody kind of was just like, look, we have a really strong identity as a further Big 12 conference, and we're excited to kind of tell you what that means. And I'd imagine that some of that conversation came directly from Brett Yormark himself, right? Telling people, we can't be sitting here talking about what's going to happen. We have to be ready to make something happen ahead.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the big accomplishments for him, is getting Oklahoma and Texas and the separation agreement done, so that we're not talking about Oklahoma and Texas leaving for another 2 years into 2025, allowing the conference to move on. And I think this was kind of like the first step in that separation process. Like, okay, now we're all together. We're all going to talk about it. This is the last time we're all going to be together, and then we can move on after this. So let's look at the season real quick, Shehan, because it's going to be a really fascinating Big 12 this year. Texas is kind of the front runner right now, but there are a lot of teams I feel like that could contend in the Big 12. What's your just kind of overarching takeaway from what this season is going to look like for the conference?
Well, I'll tell you what, you look at metrics like the SP Plus over at ESPN, and the SP Plus kind of gives a number figure that kind of rates whether you're an above average FBS team or below average FBS team. And the Big 12 is the only conference in America where every single team in the conference is rated above average. Every team is 61 or higher. So that's what we're working with. Even the SEC, even the Big 10, they have multiple teams that are in the negatives, not the Big 12. So it is going to be an unbelievably competitive year. You're talking about a team like West Virginia, that I think is going to be at the bottom of the conference. I mean, this was a program that has one of the best young running backs in the country and CJ Donaldson and a super veteran offensive line. You look at other teams that are picked near the bottom. Cincinnati was in the playoff 2 years ago, right? Like, this is what kind of conference we're looking at this year. And frankly, when you look at the future of the Big 12, I think it's going to look like this a lot. There are a lot of really well-run programs, a lot of good coaches in this conference, and there's going to be a lot of losses that wouldn't be losses if they were in other leagues. And so I think, though, you mentioned Texas off the top. This has to be Texas's conference. This has to be Texas's year if they're going to live up to the expectations that I think they've set for themselves in so many ways. Obviously, they were picked first, and there's a couple of reasons for that, right? I mean, because the first thing people say whenever that comes out is, the media, again, they're hyping up Texas like they always do. Well, again, it's been since 2009 that Big 12 media has picked them to win the Big 12 because Big 12 media doesn't fall for this. Big 12 media doesn't put expectations on a program that they don't feel like deserves it. But I would make the argument that Texas has maybe 3 of the best 5 players in the league with tight end left tackle Kelvin Banks, tight end Jatavian Sanders, and linebacker Jalen Ford. I didn't even mention Quinn Ewers. I didn't even mention Xavier Worthy. I didn't even mention their running back group. I didn't even mention some of the defensive line guys that they have. Like, they are kind of hitting the top of a development cycle at a time where everybody else is not. And look at the top contenders in the Big 12 for them, right? Oklahoma will obviously be an interesting team, but they're having to cycle in a lot of new players. Kansas State, they're going to be really good, but they're kind of the same as last year, but minus a couple of really key players. TCU, completely different. Texas Tech, obviously they haven't been in this conversation since 2008. Baylor had a bad year last year. So it's a weird year that I think Texas just has to take advantage of. And honestly, I mean, I don't want to be too doomer about it, but like, if Texas can't win the conference this year, I don't know the next time is going to be where they can win a conference.
It makes you ask the question about Steve Sarkisian because everything is laid out for him right now. I think we had this conversation a little bit ago or a couple weeks ago whenever I laid out my Big 12 media picks, and I picked Texas first for a lot of the same reasons that you mentioned. I think Xavier Worthy is one of the best wide receivers in the country, even though he had a bit of a down year last year to his standards. It's a good team, and yeah, everything's wide open for him. Everybody else is kind of in this middle of the pack. You talk about Oklahoma and Texas Tech and Kansas State and TCU and Baylor and maybe even UCF. There's a group of like 5 or 6 teams that are kind of in that second tier based on projection. Now it's going to be up to Texas. Can they live up to the expectations and rise to the occasion? I mean, everything's kind of there for them to do that. It's a matter of, can they navigate their schedule, which won't necessarily be easy, but they've got the talent to be able to do that. I think a lot of it's going to come down to coaching, and can Quinn Ewers take a developmental step that's going to really carry this team where it needs to go in this, year 3 of Steve Sarkisian. But it's a wide open league otherwise for that number 2 spot. And let's talk about Oklahoma for a second. Just give us your, impression of them. They made a lot of transfer portal additions, and Sooner fans, we're really optimistic, and maybe we're just an optimistic bunch. It's hard for us to be pessimistic because we haven't had a losing season in 25 years. But what are your thoughts from the outside looking in? Have they done enough in the portal and in their 2023, 2022 recruiting classes to really turn over, that roster that has seen so much turnover the last 2 years?
No, it's a great question. And I do want to preface it with saying, I mean, I love a lot of the process that Brent Venables does, right? His recruiting has been unbelievable. I think that their roster building has been really good. When I look at their 2024 class, I mean, my goodness, I didn't expect it to come this quickly. All that said, right, when we're just talking about the 2023 team, probably my biggest question about it, because obviously there's questions on defense. Obviously there's, a couple questions on offense. I'm just really concerned about their wide receiver room, because I look at Jaleel Farouk. I think he's a legit dude. Drake Stoops is a very solid player, but this is a system that's built so much on receivers making plays in space. And they have a couple of talents, but none of them really emerged in a major way last year in a way that I was hoping. And, I really like Javonte Barnes at running back, but is he Eric Gray in year 1? I don't know, and so I have a lot of questions about the way that sort of the process is going to work for this offense. Now, the part that you have to mention about it, of course, is that the schedule's pretty light. They're going to have some time to figure it out. They don't have to go and play one of the best teams in the league in week 2 or week 3 or anything like that. But it's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on. It's definitely something I'm a little concerned about. And obviously defensively, they were very aggressive through the portal. I think that they had some talents who will probably be better in their second season. Guys like Danny Stutzman, I expect to take a big step forward. Ethan Downs was one guy picked to the preseason All Big 12 team. And actually, I'll tell you what, I think that defensive line is the position that I expect to be most improved. I think that that's the position where I trust who they brought in. I think they identified well. I think that they have guys who I project to grow there. And obviously, coaching-wise, they should be ready. You know, I'm curious around Danny Stutzman, kind of the linebacker. Well, just on McCullough, of course, you have coming in at linebacker as well. Secondary, I'm still concerned, right? I'm still kind of waiting to see. And maybe the plan is just stop the run, survive another down, and then like we'll deal with the passing stuff later. We'll be able to kind of tread water from that perspective. So, look, the thing is, there's not a great team in the Big 12, but the flip side of that is that there's not a bad team in the Big 12. Yeah. And so it's going to be really telling. I'm going to be actually watching, I'd say, that first Big 12 game. Oklahoma, of course, plays Cincinnati. First ever game against Cincinnati at Nippert Stadium. First Big 12 game for that program. Going to be incredibly, incredibly hyped in that building. If Oklahoma can come out and just put them to sleep, like I think they have the ability to do, I'll feel a lot better because, you know, Cincinnati has some issues, but they're a good defensive team. I think it's going to be a good test that Oklahoma still should be able to win. So that's what I want to see most. Is I just need to see some of these skill talents emerge to be dynamic players, because the reality is, right? I mean, I obviously covered Baylor in the mid 2010s and got to see kind of like how things worked with that Bryles-Levy offense. And a big part of it is you have to have those guys who can take advantage when they have those opportunities in space. And I'm not saying they don't exist on Oklahoma's roster, but they haven't done it before.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair point about the wide receiver position. It's the area most people are probably concerned about on the offense, aside from maybe the offensive line. And offensive line, we probably it's one of those in Bill Bedenbaugh we trust sort of a situations. Whereas with wide receiver, okay, we got a bunch of guys that maybe could take a step, you know, in an Andrew Anthony out of, you know, the Michigan transfer, Brendan Thompson, the Texas transfer, you know, transfers from last year, JJ Hester and LV Bunkley Shelton. We just haven't seen these guys do anything yet. And, you know, Jalil Farouk, he's a guy I'm expecting to have a big year just because of what he can do with the ball in his hands as a runner and as a receiver, because he's just so dynamic with the ball in his hands. But I think it's a fair point that given that they're turning over 3/5 of their offensive line, and you don't know who your wide receiver 2 is, there are some questions on the offensive side of the ball. You hope the defense improves enough that it makes up for some of those things. And as you mentioned, the schedule gives them an opportunity to kind of figure that stuff out. That Cincinnati game, you're right, that's the one that I'm kind of looking forward to as the first kind of big test of the season, because that's going to be a raucous environment up there in Cincinnati. They know how to put on a show up there in the stadium. Like, during their playoff run, it was incredible theater to watch. They're all blacks. Like, they do an all black as well as Penn State does a whiteout. Like, it's impressive. So it'll be a really, really exciting and entertaining atmosphere. I think. I do think Oklahoma is going to be the better team. Emory Jones is going to be a potential threat because of his running ability, but ultimately I think Oklahoma is going to be more talented. But yeah, the schedule sets up for Oklahoma to improve to what we think a lot of times. I mean, the floor is 8 wins. If you can't win at least 8 games in this schedule with the schedule, then there are a lot of questions. Honestly, if you're not in Big 12 title contention, you know, the last few weeks of November, then we might have some questions too, because the schedule looks really manageable for the Sooners team. Outside of Texas, what's the game do you think that's going to give Oklahoma the most trouble on their 2023 schedule?
No, it's a good question. And, you know, it's funny. I went back a couple of months ago and picked every single game in the Big 12, right? And the thing that's going to be interesting is obviously because of losing Georgia off the 2024 schedule, they really don't have any non-conference tests. Cincinnati, you know, early in the year, that's probably a team that's going to be in the bottom part of the Big 12. They miss, I want to say it's, of course, they miss Baylor. They miss Kansas State this year. So, like, it's a pretty nice road, right? Like it's a pretty nice path once you get past that Texas game. I'm going to be real curious. I believe they don't get Texas Tech this year. They get TCU this year, right? I mean, the fact they don't even get Texas Tech, like I'm just listing off people in my mind trying to think of who they play, and they don't play anybody. I think that TCU game is going to be kind of interesting, right? Like I think that TCU is obviously a program. They're going to play them late in the year. They're one who I think just knows how to take away explosiveness. We saw that during Oklahoma's loss last season, and I actually think that their defense has a chance to be better this year. Their offense will probably take a step back, of course, without Max Duggan, but I think that'll be a good test for them. You know, I think that we mentioned that Cincinnati defense in terms of one unit. I mean, that's something where I think Oklahoma's offense has to put together a good showing for people to kind of take them seriously as a unit. And I mean, like, seriously, I think that Kansas is going to be an interesting game for them. I mean, they're going to obviously have an opportunity to play against that difficult attack. And you know, you never know what's going to happen on a given day. I think this team's going to be a little bit deeper.
Yeah, that Kansas game is definitely one of those that could just sneak up and get him. Jalen Daniels, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the nation, not just the Big 12. And if he's going like he was going early in the season last year, Kansas is going to be really tough to beat for any for any defense. It's going to be difficult to slow Jalen Daniels down. I think you're right. What do you make of that late November trip to Provo to play BYU, and in a situation where like BYU doesn't often get a team of Oklahoma's name and brand to Provo that late in the season?
Well, and I'll tell you what, obviously you mentioned I went to Baylor and I'm a Baylor guy. I got to see them obviously from afar show out in such a big way for that Baylor BYU game last year in year 2. It ended up being I believe the highest rated night game that ESPN had in 6 years, right? So like They put on a show out there at BYU. The question for me about BYU is the same question I have about Cincinnati, and that exists for UCF and Houston, but slightly lesser so. And that's, where is their depth going to be when you go into November? Because BYU is used to playing a schedule where you have 5 games a year that you go all out for, and you are preparing for those games or physically getting ready for those games, and anything could happen. And I talked to Kalani Sitake actually at Media Days a little bit off to the side, and one of the things he said was after that Baylor game, they felt like they were really beat up, that they were not prepared maybe to go play the rest of the season. And Baylor finished 6-7 in conference, right? Like it wasn't necessarily a great Baylor team. So I think I'm going to be curious. I feel pretty confident that BYU is going to get somebody. They're just too talented. When you look at their top 22, I mean, they're as good as almost anybody in the Big 12. When you look at their top 22, it's when you look at their depth that you start to run into issues. So I think it's one I'm going to have my eye on. I'm going to be looking to see who's healthy and playing for that game. I think Oklahoma is just a better team, but I'd almost put it in some ways in that Cincinnati category of, this is going to be kind of tricky. And if you don't have all your ducks in a row, like, I think that Oklahoma will be favored in 11 games this year, including, every game except for Texas in the Big 12. The thing with those other 8 is like, anything can kind of happen when you take the field in one of those games. And one thing I've talked about a lot with Texas that will be true with Oklahoma as well is this is like the most unique season that any team is ever going to have, because this is your final year in the Big 12 as a power team, right? Like Oklahoma and Texas are the standard bearers of this league. Everybody gets their last shot at them. And oh, by the way, there are 4 new teams who only get 1 shot at you. And so it's going to be such a motivation gap in some weeks. That's going to be a dynamic I'm going to be fascinated to watch throughout the season.
As we look at what games are going to matter the most this season to Big 12 title contention, obviously OU Texas is going to be huge when we determine who's going to be representing the conference in the Big 12 title game. What are some of the other games that you're kind of circling on the calendar that you think are going to have a major impact in the Big 12 title race?
So a team that I'm very interested in is Texas Tech. And again, Oklahoma misses them somehow, but I'm going to be really watching that final game. It's Texas Tech versus Texas in Austin. And that game could potentially have a trip to the Big 12 title game on the line. I think that both these teams are going to put themselves in really good positions to be there right at the end of the year. And Texas Tech actually last year beat Texas and Oklahoma in the same season for the first time in program history. Now, they won't have a chance to do that again because Oklahoma's not on the schedule, but I do think that this is it's a road game, but this is one of the biggest games in Texas Tech history. They obviously have not played in a conference championship game. I think technically ever, definitely since the Big 12 has existed. They got obviously kind of pushed out of that game in 2008 when everybody finished with the one loss. And if they were able to beat Texas and make the Big 12 title game because of it in the final game that these two programs will play as members of the same conference, I mean, I don't even have words for how huge that would potentially be. In a similar way, Texas has an interesting schedule because they do get all of the Texas schools one last time before they go, which is one reason I'm very upset that Oklahoma doesn't get Kansas State, because that just feels right. But Texas goes to Baylor. They play, I believe it's TCU and Texas Tech at home. And then the game I'm going to be watching is at Houston. And Houston is not going to be great this year, but a Dana Holgorsen team always has upside. They've got some really good receivers. Matthew Golden is a name that people need to know. He's going to be an all Big 12 receiver by the end of the year. And like we talked about Nipper and what that stadium is going to be for Oklahoma. Think about Houston getting to play against Texas, their hated rival from the Southwest Conference. One time that they're going to be a member of the same conference. Texas was a huge part of Houston getting left out of the Big 12 whenever realignment happened in 1995. This is an anger game, man. This is a revenge game if there's ever been a revenge game. And people might remember the last time that Dana Holgorsen played against Texas was 2018. And that was the Wilger 2-point conversion game. That's the last time that Dana Holgorsen played against Texas. So, look, Houston might just not be good enough to pull off the upset, but I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on it.
Well, Donovan Smith is an intriguing quarterback too, because he's one of those players that just has that it factor. Even if he doesn't have all the tools, he just has that gamer mentality where he can make you pay. Like if you give him any kind of time or you give him any kind of running lanes, he's good enough to beat you. And that'll be one of the things that's fascinating, because Texas did lose some big time talents on their defensive line. The interior defensive line guys that got drafted. So are they going to be able to maintain their lanes and keep, Donovan Smith contained? So that's going to be a fascinating one. There's so many, fascinating and fantastic storylines in the Big 12 this year. Any parting thoughts, Shehan, before we get you out? One final question. Oklahoma or Texas, do either of them or both of them make the Big 12 title game in 2023?
Yeah, so the pathway is such a big part of this, right? And obviously Texas plays Alabama early in the year. It doesn't count towards the Big 12, but that's going to, I think, be a significant table-setting game for Texas. If they were to go and get blown out, the wind is all out of the sails at that point, I think, in a big way. If I had to guess right now, I think that Texas does make the Big 12 title game. I think they are the best team in the league. I think that they'll perform as the best team in the league enough to where it's only maybe 2 losses. Oklahoma is so tough because it's like I'm right at that 2 or 3 number. I'm not sure whether I'm going 10-2. I'm not sure whether I'm going 9-3. If it's 9-3, it's probably no. If it's 10-2, it's probably yes. I'm going to narrowly lean against. I think they just get edged out by one of Kansas State or Texas Tech. But we talked about the path. The path is real. The path is legitimate. The path is going to be pretty manageable. And so, like you said, that 8-4 is the floor, man. If they won fewer than 9 games, I'm not obviously not saying that we need to overreact or anything, but like that should be a reasonable expectation with what Oklahoma has and what they bring back and the schedule that they play this upcoming season.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely fair assessment of where Oklahoma stands heading into 2023. Shehan, man, it's been a blast having you on the show. Again, congrats on the new baby. Y'all follow Shehan on Twitter at Shehan Jeyarajah. Also check out his work over at CBS Sports, one of my favorite columnists to read. So go check that out, CBS Sports. Shehan, thank you so much for joining us here on Locked On Sooners Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we'll talk to you next time. Y'all, that's Shehan Jeyarajah. Y'all make sure you go follow him on Twitter. Go read his work over there. We got a few more things we're going to discuss here on Locked On Sooners Live tonight. It's been a fantastic episode. The schedule is going to matter so much for the Oklahoma Sooners. And I think it sets up so well that, when we talk about how much Oklahoma can win, a lot of it is because of the schedule. I mean, there are not a lot of games on there that I'm like, oh man, that's a tough one. Texas is tough, but I think they're going to beat Texas. I think they're going to be so pissed, pardon my language, for what happened last year. And I think Texas is going to go into that one overlooking them a little bit. You know, when you beat a team 49-0, it's hard not to. And I mean, I remember looking back at, different lacrosse games I played, and, we had teams that we dominated, every year in, year out. There's one in particular when I was at UTA and we played Sam Houston. We just dominated them. We shut them out one year, 21-0 when I was the goalie, and came back and we were playing them a year or two later. And I think our guys just kind of underestimated what they were bringing to the table. And we got down quick, like 4-0 early in the first quarter, called a timeout when I was coaching, got everybody resettled. And then we came back and we did what we had to do, and we beat them 19-5. So it was a totally different game. But I really do think that Oklahoma is going to go into that one a completely different team. One, because of the talent that they've added defensively and what they're going to look like offensively. Dillon Gabriel, his second year in the Big 12, he's going to get a shot at Texas. We saw whenever he got a chance to play a whole game, Oklahoma was in every single game. Even if they didn't win them all, they were in every game in which Dillon Gabriel got to play the whole game. Yeah, they were getting beat pretty good by TCU early in that one before he got knocked out with a concussion. But I would not have put it past Oklahoma to rally and make that a closer contest than what it was at the end. So, man, give me Dillon Gabriel and give me Oklahoma's offense to challenge Texas and make it a much, much different game. I've picked them on this show to beat Texas, and I'm going to stand by that. I really do think that what they've brought in, Reggie Pearson, Dasan McCullough, Rondell Bothroyd, those three by themselves make such a big difference just with the edge and the experience that they bring to the table. I mean, you're talking about a guy like Rondell Bothroyd, who's got 14 sacks over the last 2 seasons, was an all-ACC player. Reggie Pearson, we saw what Reggie Pearson is capable of in that Texas Tech game last year. Like, he concussed Eric Gray. Eric Gray probably should have gotten put in the protocol in that game, but it just got overlooked. And he knocked the out of Dillon Gabriel on that sideline hit. I mean, this dude is the thumper, and you need somebody like that in your secondary that's going to put an edge in your defense. I mean, people are going to follow that dude. When he brings the physicality, everybody else is going to follow suit. You got to have one of those guys in your secondary or on your defense somewhere that's going to just inspire everybody to just take it to another level on a physicality standpoint. And then Dasan McCullough, the athleticism, the speed, the ability to rush the passer off the edge as well is going to be a game-changing dynamic. Deshaun White, he did a serviceable job in the cheetah role last year. I think this is the year where we really see what the cheetah role is intended to do with Deshaun McCullough, with Justin Harrington. Harrington now with a lot more experience in the system, a lot more understanding of what the roles, responsibilities are. And then McCullough is just a freak athlete that you can't deny the athleticism, the speed. I mean, there's so much that's going on there. It's going to be such a good cheetah position this year. And I just think the defensive line is going to be better with Dejon Terry, with Philip Paya, with Isaiah Coe and Jordan Kelly developing, Grayson Halton developing, getting a guy like Adepoja Adebare in there. Everything's going to be better. Ethan Downs, his second year as a starter, it's all going to be better. And if you're a Big 12 team and you're looking at this Oklahoma defense and you're expecting them to be the same that they were a year ago, you're going to be sorely mistaken. This is going to be so much better defense. And I think that's going to help everything. The offense is going to have to press as much because they know the defense is going to be able to make some stops. They're not going to give up 3rd and 16s nonstop, 3rd and 10s nonstop. So it's going to be a totally different schedule for the Oklahoma Sooners, a totally different 2023 season, because everything is just going to be better. Everything's going to be better. And yeah, I mentioned that 8-4 might've been the floor. I'm with Shehan. Like, I really do think 9-10 wins is going to be kind of what we're expecting out of this Sooners team. I mean, there are definitely some trap games on the schedule. That BYU game, TCU, who knows what they're going to look like toward the end of the season with Chandler Morris at quarterback. And then, Kansas, that's an intriguing matchup. I still like Oklahoma's talent. I think ultimately they would win out in that matchup, but you can't deny Jalen Daniels and what he's capable of at quarterback. So it's just very fascinating all the way across the board. Getting kind of back to recruiting a little bit. There's a lot of really intriguing storylines following the Sooners right now. Isaiah Campbell, a 2025 prospect, he issued his top 10 not long after getting a few Power 5 offers, and Oklahoma was riding on that. Is a 6'5", defensive lineman, 250, 260. Right now plays edge, but looks more like a defensive end DL tweener, similar to a Williams Nwaneri. He's a 4-star prospect out of that. But then more recently with the 2024 recruiting cycle, Josh Asiosa, sorry, I misspelled it there on the banner. Josh Asiosa, a 3-star offensive lineman out of Edmond Santa Fe, received a Rivals FutureCast predicting him to land with the Oklahoma Sooners this evening on Monday night. And so that's a really intriguing. I watched a little bit of his huddle tape. The dude's physical. He wants to just not block you. He wants to punish you. He wants to be a guy that's going to get his hands on you and then put you in the ground. He moves pretty well. I mean, he's a big cat, but he moves really, really well for a guy his size. And he probably projects more as a guard, but I could see him being a guard tackle, having that guard tackle flexibility to be able to bump out a little bit and play tackle too. Obviously he'll have to continue to work on his body and increase his strength, but he's a 3-star kid. Again, it's Edmond Santa Fe, probably not the most highly regarded high school that national recruiting analysts are going to be observing and watching film from. But if Bill Bedenbaugh likes him, that's good enough for me, right? Who am I to question the great Bill Bedenbaugh and who he's evaluating and the talents he's targeting? Josh Asiosa is a prospect that could make some noise once he gets to Oklahoma. He's got the size, he's got the frame, he's got the movement ability, he's got the physicality that you want to see on the offensive line, especially heading into the SEC. So an intriguing prospect there. Again, the prediction was from Parker Thune over at Rivals and OUInsider on Monday evening. So keep an eye out on that. Somebody asked a question a little bit earlier in the chat. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find it, but it was about Terry Bussey. If I'm feeling optimistic, nah, not really. If anything changes on Terry Bussey, we'll talk to you about it, but it looks like it's going to be it's going to be Texas A&M and not Oklahoma, which is understandable. I mean, Oklahoma's taken in 4 wide receivers so far and looking like they're going to get a 5th in Zion Ragins on Tuesday, but you'd love to get him. You wouldn't deny him if he decided to come to Oklahoma, and I'm sure they're going to continue to try to recruit him all the way until signing day. They're not going to slow that down at all. We got, Caden Durham's going to commit in late August. I couldn't remember if there are any questions out there, but if y'all have any questions that you'd like to have me discuss here on Locked On Sooners Live tonight, before we get out of here, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll discuss them. Josh, again, taking a little bit of time off this week, after he gave me a little bit of time off earlier in the month of July. But we're having a great time here on the show this month. And, it's a perfect time of the year for recruiting to hit, because there's not a whole lot else to talk about. And we're really looking forward to the football season starting and y'all being here with us here on Locked On Sooners. Okie Trades asks, how bad do the Chiefs or do the refs cheat us this year with it being our last year in the Big 12? I'm not going to deny the conspiracies just yet. I would not put it past the Big 12 to say, nah, we're not going to let Oklahoma or Texas into the Big 12 championship game. So we'll see. I mean, every call that goes Oklahoma's way or goes against Oklahoma, I'm sure that we're going to be feeling the conspiracies there, but I'm going to just try and not take a cynical approach to this season and just go from a perspective of it's football. Football happens, calls get missed. Oklahoma's going to get calls that shouldn't go their way, and they're going to be able to avoid some calls that probably should have gone against them. So I'm not going to be the conspiracy theorist. At least I'm going to try not to be. We'll see how the season's going and how much games are impacted by the referees. More than that, I'm just so over officiating, like being so heavily involved in games. Like, I know replay has been a big part of sports now for a while, but am I the only one that misses the time where we didn't have instant replay stopping down the clock like every 5 minutes in a game, or like reviewing every single thing? Like in the Women's College World Series, man, there would be reviews over games where the umpire is sitting right there watching the play happen. I'm like, can we really review that? Does that need to be reviewed? And I think the same way sometimes for for college football too. Like the official is right there. Does it need to be reviewed? And I get it. People make mistakes in all that, but man, replay review has taken up so much of the sports discussion that I'm just I'm kind of over it. Like scale it back, take it away a little bit, and just let the game be the game. Cause and especially like, reviewing penalties and things like that. I don't want any more of that. No, don't add more things that replay review could cost games. And I don't know, man, just let the game be the game. And officials also need to let the game be the game and quit trying to interject themselves in it too much. Jet Sacks asks, over under holding calls against Oklahoma opponents in 2023. I mean, if the pass rush is better, then I'm going to say over. If you're going to set the over under at, I don't know what you'd set it at, but I'll call the over, because I do think the pass rush is going to be better this year. And if it is, you're putting more pressure on the tackles. Also, the other thing, Oklahoma's defensive ends and defensive tackles got to get better at selling the holds. Like, yeah, there were holding calls, but if they're not throwing their hands up or like, turning their back, like they gotta take on some of this soccer mentality where you got to kind of exaggerate to get the call sometimes. And I know nobody wants to see that, and nobody wants flops to happen in sports, but it's part of the game, man. You see other teams do it all the time where, like, I watched the Dallas Cowboys, Tyron Smith, one of the best offensive tackles in all of football. And he's got a guy perfectly blocked, but because the defensive end throws his hand up and he's acting like he's being held, like he gets the call. I'm like, no, that was like a perfectly executed pass rush block by one of the all-time greats at offensive tackle. So anyway, this is part of I'd honestly prefer less calls in a game than more calls, because one, it stops the game down, and two, I don't need the referees deciding who wins and loses football games. I want the guys on the field deciding who wins and loses football games. All right. And Ryan Kirk's asking, do you think Jackson Arnold gets any playing time this year for trick plays similar to Kyler coming in for Baker years back, or Chandler Morris coming in for Spencer Rattler years back? Maybe. I mean, I could see them doing that. I don't necessarily see Brent Venables as much of the kind of rotating the quarterbacks, or Jeff Lebby as the rotating of the quarterbacks. Now, we did see them use trick plays mostly on special teams. And you saw them do a few like throwback, running back throwbacks, or, Braden Willis had a tight end pass at one point in time. I do think we see Jackson Arnold get playing time, but I think it's going to be more in the, hey, we're up by 20 in the fourth. Let's get our 5-star freshman some snaps before he gets into the SEC. I do believe what Brent Venables said at Big 12 Media Days when he says, hey, we probably should have played our young guys more. I think that's going to be indicative of how they manage their quarterback situation this year and just their roster. I think you're going to see guys get opportunities, especially if Oklahoma gets up. Hopefully they do get up big in some games, and we do get to see them empty the bench and play a guy like Jackson Arnold in situations where he's going to be able to even just throw the football or just get his feet wet and hand the ball off. Like, that's what I want to see. Is I want to see them get some of these young guys in, because there were a lot of situations where, why are we not playing Jaren Kanak right now? Like, why are we not playing Kobe McKenzie? You're getting blown out by TCU in the fourth quarter. Why not? Like, what? Or by Texas? Like, at halftime against Texas, you should have been playing every single one of your young guys. There's no reason a guy like, David Agwebu should have still been on the field, or Deshaun White should have still been on the field in the second half. You're all you're doing, you're just minimizing how much more you're going to lose by. No, you play the young guys every opportunity you get a chance to play. Brandon Wadley asks, which defensive backs are going to be starters this year, or who the defensive back starters are going to be. Woody Washington at one corner. At the second outside corner spot, I'm going to go with Gentry Williams. We saw a little bit of him last year. I just think he's got the attitude and the edge that Jay Valai wants out of his outside corners. And then in the slot, I think it's going to be Josiah Wagner. The dude's just made so much noise since arriving on campus that it's going to be hard for me to imagine them keeping him off the field just because he's a true freshman. I think that he's going to continue to battle for a spot and battle for playing time, and they're not going to be able to keep him off the field. And, the slot corner kind of rotates a little bit with the cheetah and with the safeties and things like that in Brent Venables' defense. But when they're in like a 3-3-5 situation, I think we see Josiah Wagner quite a bit as that slot cornerback. But when they're in like a 4-2-5 or a 4-3 or 4-2-5, that'll be interesting to see, if they pull the cheetah off the field and then insert another corner, or if they decide to insert like Peyton Bowen as the slot player, because we know he's got the athleticism and the coverage skills to do that. We'll see. That's going to be intriguing how they manage that third cornerback versus the third linebacker versus a third safety. I think we see them use a little bit of every one of those kind of alignments where they're, in a 3-3-5 with a safety as the third, as the fifth defensive back, or a 3-3-5 with the corner as the third defensive back. I think we're going to see a multitude of situations, and a lot of it can depend on the matchup. As a team, better situation at tight end, and you want to have a safety out there, in those situations, or running back. Maybe a running back is the more dynamic player than the slot player. So you want to have a guy that's a little bit more physical that can take the running back down instead of a slot corner. So that'll be fascinating to see exactly how they deploy that. But I think the key is they've got enough talented players that they're going to be able to be a little bit more multiple with their defense and not lose as much. Like the step up or the step down from, if you take Deshaun McCullough off the field because you want to run 5 defensive backs, in a 4-2-5 nickel situation, I think the step down is less drastic than it was a year ago when you just didn't have much depth elsewhere and you just kind of had to have those guys on the field all the time. Starting this season, the clock will not stop after a first down. Yeah, that's my understanding too, is that after a first down, unless it's under 2 minutes of the half, the clock won't stop. And so that's exciting. The game's going to move. Love it. Was the rush bad last year, or was holding allowed to happen? I mean, okay, so if you've been following this game long enough and covering football, I've been covering football for 7 years. 2016 is when I started writing about the Cowboys. The old adage is holding happens on every play. It's just a matter of whether or not the refs are going to call it. You could also make the case that defensive back holding, pass interference happens on every play. It's just a matter of how egregious it is. Is it egregious enough for them to call it? I just don't think the pass rush is very good. There were so many times when the quarterback had so much time to sit back there and pass. Like, it was just not good enough. And it's got to be better. Like, that's the biggest key to this team in 23 is if the pass rush is as good as it was last year, they're not going to win 10 games. If it's much, much better, they're going to have a chance. Like, and if they can, they're going to be something to watch out. Cause I think what's going to help is they've got a guy like R. Mason Thomas, who you listen to Jonah Lula talk about guys that could make a huge leap and make a huge impact this year. R. Mason's one of those dudes. Like, he's a guy that's going to have a big year. I think he could erupt for an 8-sack season. He's just so twitchy and so quick that he's going to be really, really difficult for offensive tackles to stop. Think of a guy like Nick Bonito, but quicker or twitchier. Having that guy that can get off the edge and get to the quarterback within 2 seconds, you got to have one of those guys. Unfortunately, last year, they had too many defensive ends that were kind of the big, sturdy, stocky type and not enough quick, twitchy guys. And that's why you saw R. Mason get some snaps, because you needed somebody with a little bit of burst and a little bit of juice off the edge that they didn't have really in Ethan Downs and Reggie Grimes and Marcus Stripling. Solid defensive ends, guys that are good against the run and can rush the passer a little bit, but nobody that's got the quick twitch movement that R. Mason Thomas has. I know he was a 3-star, rated prospect. I don't think that fully captures what kind of prospect and what kind of player he can be. I really do think he's going to be the next great pass rusher for Oklahoma. Yeah. And that's with Adepoju Adebari on the roster too. I think R. Mason's going to blow up this year. Any other questions here? I'm scrolling. You guys are way ahead of me. Will we get a 4-star offensive lineman this year? Yeah. I'm going to say, yeah. I think they're going to get Eddie Pierre-Louis. I do think that that's one of those, with the connections with Tampa Catholic. I don't know. I'm thinking that that's one that's going to lean Oklahoma. Grant Bricks is another one I think they could end up with. But, again, it comes back to, do you believe in Bill Bedenbaugh and his development? I do. Because remember the last 5-star offensive lineman they got didn't really ever play for him. That's Bray Walker. And that's no disrespect to Bray Walker. For some reason, didn't work out at Oklahoma, but we never got the guy on the field. So as much as the stars matter, we got to trust the coaching evaluations a little bit, especially if you think highly of Bill Bedenbaugh like I do. And I know y'all do as well. So I do think this is going to be one of those situations where, like, yeah, 3-star prospect, Josh Asiosa, you're seeing other 3-star prospects as well, and Eugene Brooks, but I do think that they're going to get 4-star offensive linemen as well. Looking for some more questions real quick. And I think that's really about it. But y'all, thank you so much for being a part of the show and subscribing to the show. It's a fun time every single week. Always appreciate what you guys bring to the table as well. It's good times. Man, we're going to have more recruiting talk as we get the Zion Ragins commitment on Tuesday. We'll have recruiting talk when we hear from Taylor Tatum and what he's going to do with his Oklahoma future, or college football future. Sorry, that's a slip of the tongue. I don't know that he's committing to Oklahoma. I'm just reading the tea leaves, seeing all the predictions, all the projections favoring the Sooners at this point. And man, I cannot wait. Okay, Steven's got one more question here. How much playing time will Kanak get? How much does he earn? Because it looked like he was going to be kind of the starter alongside Danny Stutzman and Deshaun McCullough, but there's also some buzz that Kobe McKenzie might end up being one of the starters. And to be honest, I think Kobe has got a better frame for middle linebacker for Mike than maybe Jaren Kanak does. But that doesn't mean that Kanak couldn't play it. And again, remember, Kanak was a safety. He's somebody that's going to be, moving to linebacker, still learning the linebacker position. I do think we see him at weak side some at some point in time. But Kobe, I mean, don't sleep on Kobe. Remember, this is a guy that he was trending toward Oklahoma, committed to Texas, flipped to Oklahoma. So a very talented player with a lot of upside in his own right. Probably somebody that we kind of lost in the shuffle last year. So I think there's still a bit of a battle happening at linebacker, and there's nothing really decided just yet. Tatum just took a pick with DeMarco, and the running backs looked like studs. Oh, I missed that one. I saw the running backs. I'm just not good at faces. I need that account on Twitter, Stoops Bros, that makes all the that puts all the faces or names to faces on those. So that'll really good. Yeah, Jimmy Satterfield's mentioning that Neal get playing time at linebacker. Brent Venables has been speaking very highly of Connor Neal. And I think this is the key, right? We don't know who's going to start next to Danny Stutzman and Deshaun McCullough, but what we do know is they're so much better prepared at linebacker than they were last year. They have so much better depth. And I've talked about it on the show at different times, but only 2 players in FBS football played more snaps than Danny Stutzman, and neither of them were in the Power 5, and neither of them were linebackers. All 3 Oklahoma linebackers played 900 snaps or more. Crazy. The guy that benched 350 pounds 6 times. Nah, that wasn't Kobe. That wasn't Kip Lewis. That was Lewis Carter, your true freshman. That's the dude that everybody's hyping up right now. And somebody, again, he hadn't been on campus, but Brent Venables made sure to talk more about him early in the spring and talk about what they're going to get when he gets there. The dude's just a football player. If you go back and watch his huddle, he's just really, really good. Yeah, Hank's on it. Stutzman said it was Lewis Carter. And that's one of the guys that everybody's really excited to see when they get the pads on, because the dude's just a freak athlete. Absolutely freak athlete. Lewis Carter could probably be a starting running back for 90 teams in the FBS. That's how good of a running back he was at Tampa Catholic. He played both sides of the ball and played them so well that I think he could start for a lot of teams at running back, but he's going to come to Oklahoma and be a linebacker. So, man, they've got a very, very intriguing linebacker group. And again, there's so much better setup at defensive back, so much better setup at linebacker. The defensive line group, it's got a lot more depth. We'll see how much better it is, but I really do think they're better at linebacker. They're better at defensive back. And I do think they're better along the defensive line. How much better those 3 groups are going to be, that'll be the question. And we'll continue to talk more about that here on Locked On Sooners. I'm going to be talking with Brian Smith, our recruiting analyst of the Locked On Network, for the Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning show. We'll talk Zion Ragins' commitment, where he goes, where he lands, what it all means. And then we'll also get you ready for Taylor Tatum on Friday. We'll break down where Oklahoma stands with David Stone in the wake of the Jaden Jackson commitment that occurred last week. my man, Jaden Jackson, my favorite prospect in the class. So excited to have him. Thank you so much to Shehan Jeyarajah for joining the show and giving us his thoughts on the Big 12 heading into the 2023 season. We'll bring him back as the season progresses to get his thoughts on where things stand. But it's always a great time doing the Locked On Sooners live show with y'all. Thank you so much for being a part of the show and subscribing and being a part of the chat. Appreciate just the grace and the generosity that y'all have for each other in the chat room. It's a pleasure to watch you guys interact over there as well. So thanks so much for doing that. Like the show wherever you get your podcast, subscribe, leave us a 5-star Apple review. If you like the show and you are a regular listener, I would love it if you could support the show by going and giving us a review over on Apple, rate us a 5-star. It just helps more people find out about the show. And July right now has been a great month for us, and it's all because of y'all. And so thank you so much for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. But for my partner, Josh Helmer, follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRev. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners. I'm at John9Williams. Can't wait to talk to y'all next time. Have a great night and a great Tuesday. Boomer Sooner.